really thankful on the behalf of IC, Sheikh Navaid Aziz, who had accepted to give the presentation on Islamic law. Uh, ICSC Islamic Center is a non-profit organization which is working under the Muslim Council of Calgary. We are organizing a lot of sessions here, running the Quran in schools, working on a project for Masjid on the Deep South. And right now, we can go ahead, Sheikh Navaid Aziz. Now you can start your presentation.
Inshallah. Okay, here we go. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا أما بعد. My dear brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It is an honor and pleasure to be with you here today to speak about the concept of will and inheritance in Islam. The Prophet ﷺ, he tells us in an authentic hadith, أَكْثِرُوا مِنْ ذِكْرِ حَاظِمِ اللَّذَّاتِ, that increase in your remembrance of the destroyer of pleasures. And they said, O Messenger of Allah, and it's explained in other books of hadith, حَاظِمَ اللَّذَّاتِ is the remembrance of death. Now I know this is a very uncomfortable conversation to have because it's not something that society encourages us to think about, but the inevitable reality is that each and every one of us will die one day. And this is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminds us, كُلُّ نَفْسٍ ذَائِقَةُ الْمَوْتِ, that indeed every soul shall taste death. So it is inevitable that we shall die. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also reminds us what success looks like in our faith. فَمَنْ زُحْزِهَ عَنِ النَّارِ وَأُدْخِلَ الْجَنَّةَ فَقَدْ فَازَ, that whoever is saved from the hellfire and entered into paradise, then they are the ones that are truly successful. So today I want to have a very important conversation with all of you regarding the topic of death and what needs to be done from a worldly perspective to prepare for it. What needs to be done from a worldly perspective to prepare for it. So before an individual gets to the age of sickness, of death, or as they grow older and they become immobile, there are three important documents that you want to create. There are three important documents that you want to create. Document number one is a power of attorney. And a power of attorney basically gives the rights to another individual to do all of your financial transactions on your behalf. So something like selling a car, selling a house, opening and closing bank accounts, moving investments around and things like that. That is what a power of attorney does. Number two, a second important document that you want to create is a personal directive. So in this situation or circumstance, la qaddar Allah, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect all of us, that someone gets into a bad accident and they're unconscious, and there are decisions that need to be made about their health. So perhaps there's two scenarios. One is a surgery, one is not surgery, one is more risky than the other. Someone has to be able to make those decisions. So you have to appoint someone, and that's what a personal directive is, that can make those decisions on your behalf, that can make those decisions on your behalf. And then the third and last important document is the making of a will, the making of a will. And that is what we're going to be discussing today. That is what we're going to be discussing today. So when an individual passes away, there's four things that happen with their wealth. There are four things that happen with their wealth. And this is the introduction that I want to start off with. The first thing that happens with your wealth is that your funeral expenses are meant to be deducted from it and used to pay for your funeral expenses. So now one of the best ways to prepare for this is that if you view yourself that you're going to be staying in a current city for a prolonged period of time, and perhaps this is your final place and you're not planning on moving around for work or for family anymore, then it's actually encouraged that you actually invest in your plot of land where you think you will be buried, where you think you will be buried. So prepare for that in advance, rather than having to do that at your time of death or after your time of death, and your family has to take care of that for you. So I do know that this is something that the MCC does cater to. So it is a good idea for those of you that are planning on staying in Calgary for a prolonged period of time to invest in that. I don't know what the current rates are, but I do know 3 years ago, the average price for a funeral, and this is the most basic funeral, was roughly around $5,500, was roughly around $5,500. So that's $5,500 to take care of your funeral expenses and your burial. The second thing that will happen with your wealth is that your debts will be paid off at that time. Your debts will be paid off at that time. And I want to speak about the topic of debt in a little bit of detail. Debt in Islam, the default ruling is that it is actually discouraged. You're not encouraged to have a debt unless it is an absolute necessity. In our society, the bank will constantly bombard you with advertisements and offers to incur debt as much as possible. And that is something that you want to try to avoid. You want to try to avoid debt as much as possible. There are several ahadith that allude to the fact that the Prophet ﷺ refused to pray the janazah of individuals due to the fact that they had debt, So those hadith require some details, of course. These are individuals that had the ability to pay it off and they didn't pay it off. So that's something to look at as well. But it is discouraged to have debt, and you don't want to die in a state of debt. Other narrations mention that a person's hisab will not begin until their debt is paid off, So you want to make sure that you pay off your debts before you pass away. And if you're unable to pay off your debts, then at least you have that wealth that is stored aside to pay off your debts from the money that you leave behind. The third thing that will happen, and actually before I move on to the third thing, let me just comment on something as well. For those brothers and sisters that had a deferred mahar, that had a delayed mahar, meaning that you chose to give your mahar at a later point in time, then even the mahar is considered a debt. People may think that the husband passes away and therefore he doesn't have to pay the mahar anymore. This is not correct, but rather the mahar is a part of the debt, and that has to be paid off. And this is separate from the wife's inheritance. And we shouldn't put our sisters in a circumstance where we try to force them that if you take the mahar, then you can't have the inheritance, or you have the inheritance, then you can't take the mahar. That's not how it works. But rather, the mahar is something else, and the inheritance is something else. Then the third thing that happens is the wasiyah. Now, the term wasiyah in the Arabic language, it encompasses the will as well, but when used very specifically, it refers to a donation portion of your wealth. And this is in the hadith of Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas radiallahu anhu, where the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, at the conclusion of, he said, "Athuluth wa thuluthu kathir," that even a third and a third is too much. So a person may think that, when I pass away, I want to give as much charity as possible. But that isn't actually a good thing to do. In fact, if you want to give charity while you're alive. The Prophet ﷺ encouraged Sa'd and his family to leave the family of Sa'd rich, that don't leave them in a situation where they are left begging. So it is actually better to leave your wealth for your family at your time of death and give your sadaqah while you're alive. However, if you do want to give charity after your death, you are allowed giving up to 1/3 of your remaining wealth. So what is the remaining wealth? After the funeral expenses, after the debts, then any money that is left over, you can use up to 1/3 of that wealth to give it as charity. Now, can this charity be given to everyone? And the answer is no. There's one main condition that has to be met in this scenario, and that is that this charity cannot be given to someone that is naturally inheriting from you, unless you seek permission from all of the inheritors. So you can't give your 1/3 either to your mother or to your father or to your wife or to your children, because they are considered natural inheritors. However, if you want to give it to your aunt, to your uncle, to your cousins, to a friend, to a particular masjid, to a particular charity organization, then you are allowed to do that. You are allowed to do that up to 1/3. And then the fourth and last thing that happens with your wealth is the actual distribution of the mirath. And that is what the will actually dictates. So if you are familiar with Surah An-Nisa, in Surah An-Nisa, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us how the mirath or the inheritance should be distributed. And that's mentioned in detail in the appendixes of the document. So before today's session, you were sent a document. I'm hoping some of you got a chance to look it over. If you didn't, then inshallah we will be quickly going over this document as well. So now, let us jump into the document. What you have in front of you is a template that was put together by Sheikh Hassan Shaybani from the Islamic Information Society of Calgary. And there were several people that were consulted in the making of this will. And I always give the disclaimer that anytime when it comes to a legal document, you want to do your due diligence and always consult your legal consultant. So that can be a lawyer, that can be a notary, whoever your legal consultant is, always consult them before finalizing a will. And that is because the laws will regularly change. So something may be legal and mandated right now, but in a couple of years from now, that could change. So anytime you do come up with a will, then it is always important that do consult your lawyer and do consult your notary. This is just a template. This is just a template, and this should not constitute legal advice. This should not constitute legal advice. So now we begin with the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, and we talk about what is the ruling on having a will. Is having a will something mandatory, or is it something that is highly recommended? And these are the two opinions of the scholars. Opinion number one, and this is the opinion of the Zahiri madhab and some of the tabi'een, they said that having a will is mandatory, that if every individual does not have a will, then they are sinful for doing so. However, the vast majority of the fuqaha, and this encompasses the four schools of thought from the Hanafi, Maliki, Shafi'i, and Hanbali school, they said that it is a sunnah mu'akkada, that it is highly recommended to have a will. It is highly recommended to have a will. And this is based upon the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, that it is not permissible for any Muslim who has something to will to stay for 2 nights without having his last will and testament written and kept ready for him, So it is very important that all of us take this seriously and have this will filled out. So now, let us begin with page number 1. Page number 1 is basically identifying who you are. So you will start off by saying I, and you can put your name over here. So I, Navaid Aziz, presently residing at, and you put your address over here. You want to make sure that the name that you put over here is your legal name, So whatever your passport says, whatever your driver's license says, that is the name that you want to put. That is the name that you want to put. And you don't want to put a nickname or an incomplete name. So some of us, we will have 3 or 4 names. Make sure all of those names are mentioned over here. And then you can put your address as well. And this is just to identify who you are. Then at the bottom of every page, you will also see signature. This is your signature that has to be present at the bottom of the page. This is your signature that has to be written at the bottom of the page.
Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh. Can you share the will? Still not visible to the attendee.
It should be up on the screen, is it not?
It is. I can see it.
Okay, I don't see here. Don't know why. You can go ahead.
I can continue? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry for interruption. If you have a 2 screen, you can see. I open the 2 screens and I see one will on one screen and like a presentation on another screen.
Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you.
No problem.
We can see it.
I have shared the link. You can download it from there.
Inshallah. So you will continue from here. So we're on page number 1. I was saying that on the bottom of the first page, you can see the signature requirement, and that is for you. I also know some brothers that when they took this to the notary required that every witness that was present had to sign each page as well. Every witness had to sign each page as well. But again, this is something that you can consult your notary with. On the second page, you will see article number 1, which is funeral and burial rites, Now, in Islam, there are quite a few regulations that have to be met for a person's funeral and burial. So starting off from the moment of death, that time the body is to be taken to be washed wherever the facility is. So in Calgary, we know we have Akram Juma and we have the Southwest Masjid. So it's taken to one of those two masjids and the body is meant to be washed. And this is the first sunnah that needs to be fulfilled after death. The second sunnah after death is that the body should be shrouded in 3 white sheets. The body should be shrouded in 3 white sheets. Then at that time, the body is either taken to the masjid or taken to the cemetery. And with COVID restrictions right now, they're taking anyone with COVID-related cases directly to the cemetery and not they bringing them to the masjid. The janazah is prayed at that time. And this is the third sunnah that has to be fulfilled, which is the praying of the janazah. And then the fourth sunnah is the actual burial inside a Muslim cemetery, So these are the sunnahs that you want to make sure are fulfilled at your time of death. You want to make sure that the individual that you appoint over here has knowledge of this, that your body should be washed, it should be shrouded, the janazah should be prayed, and you should be taken to a Muslim cemetery. These are very important things to remember. So the individual that you point over here is someone that you trust to fulfill this responsibility and is also someone that is knowledgeable enough how to fulfill this responsibility. Is also knowledgeable enough how to fulfill that responsibility. So this is this section over here. So it says, I hereby nominate and appoint. You put the person's name on the first line. You put their address on the second line. Now, what if the person that you appoint is not available or they're traveling or something else has happened to them? Then on the 5th line, you actually put a second nominee. On the 5th line, you will put a second nominee. And again, someone responsible and trustworthy and someone that has the knowledge on how to fulfill these things. Now keep in mind, they don't need to know how to do the ghusl, they don't need to know how to lead the janazah, but they should have the knowledge of who to reach out to and who to contact. That is what the important knowledge is that I'm referring to. Now this portion over here, would I recommend putting a close family member? And I think there's 2 things to consider over here if you're nominating a family member. That at your time of death, it is a very emotionally heightened time. People are extra high levels of stress and are extra emotional depending on how close they were to you. So my personal advice is that when you're putting someone for a funeral and burial rites director and for the executor of your will, keep someone that is close and that you trust, but also someone that isn't so close that they're emotionally overwhelmed. So someone like your wife or like your daughter, I don't believe is a good idea to put them in either of these situations, because it is a very highly emotional time and it's going to be very difficult to navigate through it. So do consider putting someone that has the ability to take care of these things for you. Now we move on to article number 2. Article number 2 consists of 2 portions. Number 1 is the executor of the will, and then number 2 is the legal guardian. So let's talk about the executor of the will. The executor of the will is someone that is going to have a copy of this will, and they are going to try their utmost best to make sure that your requests in this will are implemented. So your requests for sadaqah that you wanted to do, to make sure that your burial person is contacted and they take care of all of your rights, they will oversee that in contacting that person. And then also, la qaddarallah, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us all. In the unfortunate circumstance, if something was to happen to us and our spouses at the same time, then they will also be making sure that your children go to the person that you appoint. And we're going to be talking about the guardians in a little bit. So the executor is the one that is a general director of your will. They will generally see everything that is mentioned in the will and make sure that it is implemented. Make sure that it is implemented. Again, over here, you want to make sure it is someone that is trustworthy, that they will fulfill the responsibility. Number two, that they are knowledgeable enough about the contents of the will and also the Islamic importance of having these things fulfilled. The Islamic importance of having these things fulfilled. So for example, when it comes to the inheritance and who deserves what portion, the appendix of the will gives all of that information. But let's just say there's a circumstance, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best, that isn't mentioned in this will, or is an extraordinary circumstance. Then in that sort of situation, they should at least have the contact information of an imam or an Islamic organization that can help them with that situation, that can help them with that situation. So that is who you should be appointing for your executor. Now, pertaining to the executor and the burial and funeral rites, I always recommend that you do it with someone that you have sought permission from. So don't put anyone's name without seeking their permission. And then number two, someone that is actually in your city. People often think, how about if I appoint my brother that lives in Pakistan or in India or in Bangladesh or another part of the world? I think it's great that you show them that sort of respect and that sort of love, but it is very, very impractical. It is very, very impractical. And over here, you want to be thinking about practicality. So appoint someone in your locality instead. Appoint someone in your locality instead. So starting off with Article 2, I hereby nominate and appoint, and you put the person's name on the first line, residing at, and this is where you put their address. This is where you put their address. Then, if that person is not available, on the fifth line, you'll put the person's name and put the second person's address. So you put the second person's name and the second person's address. This is for the executor of the will. This is for the executor of the will. Now, in Part C of Article number 2, this is the guardian of your children. This is the guardian of your children. The guardian of your children, the default ruling in Canadian law is if one spouse passes away, then the children naturally go to the other spouse, as long as there's no restraining order against them or there's another concern against them. That is the default ruling. But in this situation, again, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect all of us and our families, that something does happen to you and your spouse, then where should your children go at that time? Where does your children go at that time? And that is why it is so important to mention over here, particularly if they're under the age of 18 and not at the age of majority, that they don't end up in a foster home or something of that nature, that you do appoint someone, And again, it is someone that you trust and love, but also someone that knows the Islamic responsibilities of raising children. So someone that will encourage them to pray their 5 daily prayers, someone that will encourage them to read their Quran and to go to Salatul Jum'ah and fast in the Ramadan and things of that nature. Those are the type of people you want to encourage to take care of your children. Those are the type of people you want to encourage to take care of your children. So in Part C, you say, I hereby nominate and appoint, and you put the person's name, and then on the second line, you put their address. And in the situation that that person is not available, then you mention on line number 7, I believe 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, line number 7, a second person, and on line number 8, their address. Line number 8, their address. So you appoint 2 people to take care of your children. Article number 3 is about debts and expenses. So we've already spoken about the expenses of the funeral and the burial services already. But there are perhaps other expenses that were ongoing that for that period of time that need to be paid off immediately. So that money too will also be deducted, but that will be deducted after the funeral expenses. That will be deducted after the funeral expenses. And then also in terms of your debts, it's very good to keep a document. It is very good to keep a document that has your debts written down. So they're consolidated in one area and they can be easily accessible in the case that you're not able to pay them off before you pass away. In the situation that you're not able to pay them off before you pass away, then at least they're consolidated in one area so that the person that is executing your will is able to pay off your debts, is able to pay off your debts. And again, I mentioned that we have narrations that mention that the hisab of the individual will not begin until the person's debts are paid off. And if a person does not pay off their debts, then before they will be entered into Jannah, there will be a hisab that takes place on that day, where a person will exchange good deeds and bad deeds, where they will give their good deeds away, and if they have no more good deeds to give away, then they start incurring the bad sins, the sins of the individual that they owe to, before they can be entered into paradise, before they can be entered into paradise. So now that is why it is important to make sure that you fulfill your debts. That is from a worldly perspective. There are also certain debts that are the rights of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So things like fasting, you can appoint someone to make up any fasts that you have left. Things like zakat for the coming year. Things like oaths that you take. So if someone had an oath that they made, that oath should be fulfilled. If someone has any kafara to give, then that kafara should be given. And if the person had the ability to perform hajj, but they didn't perform hajj, then that is also considered a debt to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is also considered a debt to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that debt should also be done. That debt should also be done. Now, it is not a requirement that you appoint someone to do these things for you. However, the close family and friends of the deceased should take it upon themselves to make sure these are fulfilled. The close family and friends of the deceased should take it upon themselves to make sure that these are fulfilled. That is what article number 3 is. Article number 4 actually gets into the wasiyah. And if you remember in my introduction, I spoke about how an individual can donate up to 1/3 of their wealth. And I mentioned the condition that has to be kept in mind is that it is not someone that is naturally inheriting from you. So it cannot be your parents, it cannot be your children, it cannot be your direct siblings. However, it can be a second or third cousin. It can be an aunt and an uncle. It can be a masjid. It can be a madrasa, a hospital, a charity organization, anything that you like besides that. Then you will add, you can add their names over here. So in page number 5, it says name of persons, organizations. You can put it over there. And then you put the percentage amounts. You put the percentage amounts, and then you write out the percentage. You write out the percentage. Now you want to make sure that the number that you add up does not exceed 33%. The number that you add up does not exceed 33%. So for example, over here, you can put my cousin, Muhammad, who is in Pakistan. I'm going to give him 10%. Then I will give this masjid another 10%. Then I will give this charity organization 10%. And at number 4, I will sponsor an orphan in Pakistan for 3%. So the total of the 4 lines comes to 33%. So please make sure that whatever you put that maximizes or that a maximum of 33%. If you put something over 33%, then anything over 33% will be rejected, and at 33%, it will be stopped. It will be stopped. Then article number 5 basically says that the rest of the inheritance should be distributed according to the legislation of Islam that we find in the Quran and the Hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And the last part is just the witnessing at that time. So you will put the date at the bottom of page 6, and then your legal name. And then for converts, if they have a Muslim name, they can also put in their Muslim name on this line. And then you will have your 3 witnesses. And then you will have your 3 witnesses. Generally, Islamically, you only need 2 witnesses, but the 3rd witness is just there as extra security. The 3rd witness is just there as extra security and as a backup if something was to happen to one of the witnesses. Then you put the total number of pages in this document. So remember, if you add an extra page that has your debts, some people like to put a page that has all of their assets, but I don't encourage that to make it a part of your will. because anytime your assets change, then you will have to update that as well. And then you will make 3 copies, and then you keep 1 copy with yourself, 1 copy with the executor, and 1 copy with someone else. You keep 1 copy with someone else, and then you get it signed, and preferably get it notarized as well. Preferably get it notarized as well. However, again, I will emphasize, do your own due diligence and speak to a notary and a lawyer in advance, and make sure that this fulfills all of your personal requirements, that it fulfills all of your personal requirements. From page 8 all the way till the end, then it goes through the different scenarios in Islamic inheritance. It goes through the different scenarios in Islamic inheritance. So scenario number 1 is someone that doesn't have any relatives, someone that doesn't have any relatives. And then it goes on to all of the other scenarios that are there, all the way till the end. And then it also has that disclaimer that we've tried to cover as many of the cases as we can. However, if there is a scenario that hasn't been covered, then please stick to the guidelines of the Quran and the Sunnah, and reach out to your local Islamic organization who can help you get the answer that you need. They can help you get the answer that you need, that perhaps there is an extra special circumstance that hasn't been mentioned. So these are all of the pages of the will, and this is how you fill it out. And inshallah, now I will open up the floor for questions and answers, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. Okay.
Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh. How do you want to do it? Should they put the questions in the chat box? Are you comfortable that way, or you want them to unmute the map?
I'm fine either way, inshallah. So I'll go through the chat box, and then if anyone wants to add more questions, they can go through, add it to the chat box as well. If not, then people can add, I'll give them an opportunity to take the mic, and then they can respond at that time, inshallah.
Jazakallah khair.
Wa iyak. Okay, so let me scroll up. Question number 1 is, Salam Sheikh, if you have debt and not paid at the time of your death, you will be giving your good deeds to someone on the Day of Judgment? That is not the case. That is only if your family and executor do not pay off your debts after you die. So if you have not left enough money behind and no one offers as sadaqah to pay off your debts on your behalf, then that is when the exchange of good deeds and bad deeds will take place in the hereafter. However, if you have left enough money behind and your debts are paid off, or if someone volunteers to pay off your debts, then there will be no exchange of good deeds and bad deeds. Can you list nephews and nieces in the wasiyah component of the will? Yes, you can. You can list your nieces and nephews in your wasiyah component because they're not considered natural inheritors. Salam, is will writing mandatory in countries and states where Islamic Sharia law are implemented by the government when it comes to inheritance? I am not sure. This is something you will have to look at in those countries. This is something that you will have to look at in those countries. However, it is still highly encouraged to do so, because in case you want to appoint some of your wealth to a charity, or you have some special requests that you want to make, then it is still important to have a will written down. It is still important to have a will written down. Can we get a Word file for the will so changes can be made? As far as I know, I do not know if there is a Word document that is available. However, I do know that this document can be converted to a document, to a Word document, and you can do that yourself, inshallah. You can do that yourself. In Canadian law, do we have to have the will notarized and signed by a lawyer, or just signing it with one sign and witnesses and handing it to the executor is good to go? So there are special circumstances that always change, and that is why I always suggest consult your lawyer for this answer. So sometimes it's good to go, at other times it's not good to go. Does your will get contested in court? Are your family members going to argue after you pass away? I don't know the answers to those questions. So that is why it is always important to consult your lawyer, and I cannot give legal advice at that time. However, I can say that sometimes it has worked, and as long as there's no contesting, then at that time this will was acceptable. But please do consult your lawyer. Salam, do we need to attest will document by notary public or by a lawyer? Again, please consult your lawyer or your notary to get that answer. Is 1/3 allocation mandatory and we can distribute as it to the warithin? It is not mandatory. It's not even sunnah or mustahab. It's a choice that you have. So it's not something that you have to do. It's a choice that's there if you choose to do so. It's a choice that if you want to do it, you can do it, but it's not something that you have to do. Please just give me 1 second so I can get a sip of water. Bismillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Would the money in various bank accounts be all included in this will by default, or does one need to mention it specifically? As long as we can identify that those bank accounts are under your name, then you don't need to mention it specifically. As long as we can identify that they're under your name, then you don't need to do it specifically. And that is something that I would not encourage. Do not specifically write down your assets because your assets will regularly change. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. Do we have to update will if someone we appoint in will dies? And the answer is no. That is why the backup person is always there. However, if both of them pass away or both of them are not well, then it would be a good idea to update your will at that time. It would be a good idea to update your will at that time. Azhar Allah has a question. So Azhar, did you want to use the mic or are you going to be typing your question?
Yeah, I can use the mic.
Sure, go ahead, Azhar.
To know once the will has been made, notarized officially, and scenario changes, something come in my mind, or anything happens in the family. So, is it possible we can, or is it permissible once the will has been officially created? Can we make the changes in the will officially?
Yes, you can make the changes in the will officially. Just either you tear up the old will and completely discard it and you tell all the witnesses that it has been torn up. That is option number 1. Or option number 2, you just update the current will if it's just a small minor change. And then you would go through all the copies of the will, get them all updated with all of the witnesses present. And that is also an option as well.
So the will has been slightly changed. So I have to go again to the lawyer and have to go to the lawyer again.
I'm really sorry, Azhar. The sound was not clear.
Once we decide will or some person decide to change the will, so again we have to go through the lawyer.
Brother, there is a lots of background noise coming in your question. You may need to work with your microphone.
Can you hear me now?
We can, but there's still a lot of noise there.
In the question then. Sorry for inconvenience.
Yeah, no problem, inshallah. Okay, I'll go on to the next question. Can we make any will which is not aligned with law but aligned with Islamic Sharia? So the danger of doing that is if you do a will that isn't in line with Canadian law and you're living in Canada, it is feared that it may not be implemented. So you may be doing something that is not implementable after you pass away. So you want to make sure that what you're doing is in line with Islamic law as well as Canadian law. And this is why we provide this template that hopefully you can fill out and take to a notary and take to a lawyer and speak about your circumstance, and hopefully they can guide you as well. And now just Rana's question. Again, this is something that you will have to consult your lawyer with, and they can tell you a finalized answer. So take this template and discuss it with them and see what they say. Right? I cannot give legal advice, and that is why I'm saying it is best to consult a notary or a lawyer to do so. Question: can a person change will once it has been made notarized officially? Yes, you can change your will once it has been notarized officially. You will either tear up the previous will and all the copies that exist, or as I mentioned, you collect all the copies that exist and you contact all of the witnesses. And if it's just a small update, you can update the current copy and then get it notarized again. Next question: mortgage is a loan? Yes, that is correct. And that would fall under the same loan conditions and has to be paid before your death. So taking a mortgage is actually something that is quite common. However, we have to look at the Islamic validity of it. Is taking a conventional mortgage actually halal or not? My personal opinion, and I do not impose this opinion on anyone, I'm just sharing it as a religious advisor, is that the general default ruling on mortgage, a conventional mortgage through the bank, is that it is not allowed. It is haram to do so unless an individual has a special circumstance and they speak to their local imam or their local sheikh or their local mufti, and then that local imam or that local sheikh or that local mufti gives them the concession and gives them the fatwa that they're allowed to do so, then it will be halal and they have no burden upon themselves. The mistake that people make is that they will often go and get a bank mortgage without consulting their local imam, sheikh or mufti. Then that ownership and burden is still on them because they didn't do their due diligence. Now, in that situation, this mortgage, this person should have enough money to pay off their mortgage before they pass away, or then that person will exchange good and bad deeds on the day of judgment if their family members do not pay it off for them. If their family members do not pay it off for them. There's a question about the recording. Inshallah, the ICSC can answer that question later on. Assalamu alaikum. Is there a scenario where parents decided to settle the property amongst the heirs? However, one of the parent is still alive. Who should be taking care of that parent as the only son? Is he bound to take care of him or her as he got 2 shares compared to his sister? I think these specific scenarios, you should sit down with your local imam or sheikh and discuss with them, and they can give you an answer to that question. If you have gifted something to someone but are holding on to it until you pass away, for example, gifting property or jewelry or children, will that be considered as a part of inheritance or will it be treated as a gift? So if you have transferred the title of the whatever you're holding on to, then you are allowed holding on to it. However, if you haven't transferred the title, then you haven't transferred ownership, and therefore it is a delayed gift. And that delayed gift will go into the inheritance if you haven't transferred the ownership. If you haven't transferred the ownership, then it will be thrown into the inheritance. So anything that you want to give away, you should transfer ownership while you are alive. Transfer ownership while you are alive. If the warithin don't follow the will, then are you sinful? Well, the executor is the one that has to implement the will. The executor is the one that has to implement the will. Now, if the warithin choose not to take their inheritance, then that is not a burden that rests on you. That is not a burden that rests on you. I believe we can appoint more than 2 executor, 4 or 5. Yes, you can appoint as many backup executors as you want, but they will go one by one in terms of order. So if one is not available, then the second one will be asked to do so. Then we have Nurun Muhammad. You take the mic and ask your question, inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, Sheikh.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Yeah, just had a question with regards to if someone had his wife not willing to sign, like having the wife signing the will, is this a requirement if the distribution that you want to do Islamically is not what is the land, law of the land, and the wife is unwilling to go anything other than what she thinks is right or her portion. So, for example, Islamically, 1/8 would be the wife's portion, and the children and other people will get the rest. For example, if she believes that she should get half, would the person be sinful for that?
So there's 2 elements to this. Element number 1 is in terms of filling the will, your spouse actually has no role in your personal will. So the husband has no role in the will of the wife, and the wife has no role in the will of the husband. These are things that are very personal in nature. You can seek advice from the other, but you cannot dictate to the other what they should do. Then number 2, there are certain things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has legislated in the Quran, and from those things are the laws of inheritance. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, out of His infinite wisdom, His mercy, and His justice, has given those shares. Now, if a person wants to give more to their wife, it has to be done before their death. While they're alive, they can gift as much as they want to their wife. However, after the person passes away, then the rules of mirath have to be implemented. The rules of mirath have to be implemented, and a person will be sinful if they don't choose the laws of mirath that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has legislated. And if a person is not content with those laws, then there is a greater spiritual sin that needs to be looked at. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best.
Jazakallah khair.
Wa iyak. Sorry, I'm getting too many pop-ups on my screen from all the questions that are coming through. So let me just get back to the right part where I was. The next person is Shari. Shari, you can ask your question.
Sorry, I was just reminding everyone if the mic was not, like if their mic wasn't working to type that. Jazakallah.
I believe you guys have arranged a lawyer. Isn't that? I'm not sure if the ICSC has arranged a lawyer. In my personal experience, the lawyer that I personally recommend and I work with closely is Brother Faraz Bawa. I know he has a copy of this will and has gone through this will as well. So he's a person that you can contact. And perhaps the ICSC can also recommend someone for you as well. And as you can see, they will be providing the recording as well. The document was also emailed to you. So if you registered for the event, you should have been given the link to the document as well. The next question is, if we forget the debt, can we say that some percentage of my money go to charity? You should do that while you're alive. You shouldn't do that after you pass away. So if you have debts that you don't remember, then give charity while you're alive for that cause. Next question is, can you assign all of your wealth to one child if you have one child only? So if in the circumstance and situation that you're living in a non-Muslim country, like we are in Canada, and you have absolutely no other relatives out there, and I mean no one at all, then in that sort of situation, you can designate that wealth to one person. But this is under the condition that you're living in a non-Muslim country where there is no Baytul Mal and you have no other relatives, then that is something that is allowed. We have Walid. Walid, you can ask your question.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, Sheikh. First, I would like to thank you and Jazakallah khair for the knowledge we get today. It's a huge information that we learned today. My question is about, I understand your advice about assigning a local executors for the will, but my question is, what's your advice about assigning guardians out of the country?
Excellent. Good question. Walid, wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh wa iyak. It's my pleasure to help and serve. So in terms of the guardians, you should appoint someone that will take the best care of your children. So if that person is in the country, that's great. If they're outside of the country, then you should provide some sort of way that they can get there as well. So maybe as a part of your will, maybe mention that, can you please facilitate the travel of my children to so-and-so who can look after, my children. And that's something to keep in mind, inshallah, that when you appoint the guardian, it is the person that can take the best care of your children, inshallah. And Allah knows best. Wa iyak. How should jointly held assets between a wife and husband be dealt with in the will from an Islamic perspective? Then each person should know their percentage of ownership of those assets, and based upon their percentage of ownership of those assets, that is how the assets will be divided. Safa has a question. I have seen certain Islamic wills where an individual specify, my daughter Asma will get 1/7, my son Zaid will get 1/7, my wife will get 1/7. Contrary to this, your template doesn't go into this detail. It just states Schedule A. Should one leave this vague and just go in accordance to Islamic law or Schedule A? Yes, you should go according to Islamic law, which is what Schedule A attempts to do, And appointing specific shares for your family is not allowed Islamically after you pass away. Any wealth that you give before your death, you can divide as you please. However, after your death takes place, then it is the laws of Islam that should be given precedence. It is the laws of Islam that should be given precedence in this situation. Okay, please share the details of Faraz Bawa if possible. Yes, just give me 1 second and I will share it in the link.
Sheikh, some of the people join late. Can you explain about the power of attorney? Because we face some of the peoples here when they passed away, they don't have the joint account with their family, also with their wife. So they have a lot of difficulties here. So little bit, can you explain about power of attorney or joint account?
Sure, just 1 second. Okay, I've shared the details for Faraz Bawa in the chat. Is it haram to distribute your wealth to your children equally? Like I mentioned, if you're alive, you can distribute it any way that you want. But after you pass away, it should be distributed according to Islamic law. Now, in terms of power of attorney, I mentioned that before an individual gets old and before they get sick, you want to prepare for worst case scenarios. And there's 3 documents that you want to prepare. Number 1 is a power of attorney. And this basically gives an individual the right to do financial transactions on your behalf, buying or selling your car, your house, your investments, so on and so forth. So this will give them that ability to do so as well. Then the second is the personal directive. The personal directive is related to any health issues. So any surgeries that may take place if you're unconscious, any form of any other decisions related to your health that need to be made, then this person will have the ability to make those decisions with the personal directive. And then the third one is the will, which we discussed today. Then the issue of joint accounts. It's always important that you always try to keep some sort of ownership of the percentages that you have. So if you're putting your wealth together, then try to keep track how much is whose wealth, and that is the best thing to do. Or what you are doing, and you can make the intention to do this as well, that any money that I'm putting into my joint account, I'm automatically giving to my spouse. And therefore they are free to do with it as they please while they're alive and even after they pass away. And then Islamically, there's no problem with that. However, if you want portions of your joint account to be shared into your inheritance, then you have to know how much ownership of that joint account you actually have. If you do not have evidence of your property or your assets, then they cannot be included in the distribution. Can you speak the topic of organ donation from the Islamic perspective? It's actually a very long discussion to have, and I don't think that this is the place to have it. It's not something you need to mention in your will. It's not something that needs to be mentioned in your will. Is there any format available for power of attorney and personal directives? There are formats that are available. Again, but this is a conversation that you would want to have with your lawyer or notary. I do know our brother Faraz Bawa, he has some templates available. So that's something that perhaps you can organize an event with him and he can speak about as well. Then the last question that we have, in case of a husband's wife going in a state of coma in Canadian law, are the children automatically get the power of attorney? No, power of attorney is not automatically transferred. It is something that you actually have to appoint. You have to appoint a person with the power of attorney, and only then will they have power of attorney. It's not something that's automatically transferred. I also see that there's 2 people with their hands up. So I'm not sure if someone's waiting to ask a question, but if you are, you can go ahead, inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh.
Wa alaikum salam.
Thanks for the informative session. My question is, if the will is attested by Commissioner of Oath instead of notary, is it still recognized by Alberta law?
Yeah, so a commissioner of oaths is perfectly fine. That's not a problem, inshallah.
Okay. And my second question is it mandatory to have bank as the executor on the will?
No, it's not mandatory at all. You can appoint whoever you want, but it's always good to keep a copy of your will with your bank, so that if you were to pass away, they know who is allowed to come in and withdraw money and so on and so forth from your account.
Jazakallah khair, Sheikh.
Well, yeah, no problem.
Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
My question is that I have one daughter who is adult. So, and in my life, can I make a will, or can I transfer the property or the banks, whatever I have, in her name with my wife consent?
So do you have any other children, or you only have one daughter?
Oh, one daughter only.
So if you have one daughter, then while you're alive, you can do whatever you like. You can give whatever you want to her, and that's not a problem, inshallah. But after you pass away, then the laws of inheritance need to be applied, inshallah.
Okay, thank
you. Okay. Then we have another question. Do we have to give a copy to a lawyer to be accepted by the court? No, you don't have to give a copy to the lawyer. You just have to make sure it's approved by the lawyer. And the copies with the executor and the witnesses is fine, inshallah. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best.
Sheikh, do wife and husband should have a separate will?
Yes, every individual should have their own will. Every individual should have their own will.
Okay. If a husband give his property to the wife, so if wife passed away, so it automatically goes to the government, or what happened?
Those sort of questions is probably best to ask a lawyer.
Okay.
Yeah.
So in the will, we have to mention only the property in Canada or outside of the Canada too?
No, in your will, you don't have to mention any property at all. Just keep it general. But however, keep documentation for everything that you own together. So, keep all of your paperwork together of everything that you own so that it's easily accessible once you pass away.
Okay. So we have to update the kid if situation changes, like if your kids or something, so we have to change our will?
No, you don't have to update your will if you have more kids or if your kids pass away. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect them. You don't have to update your will in that situation, no.
Okay. So anybody have any questions?
I just have one question, Sheikh. I googled the lawyer Faraz Bawa, but I couldn't find him in Google.
I shared the link in the chat. So if you go through the chat, I've shared the link already.
Okay, thank you.
At 4:55 p.m., you will find my name, and I shared the link at 4:55, or actually, it's 2:55 p.m. because my computer is on Eastern time right now. So if you go to 2:55 p.m., you'll see the link from me for Brother Faraz Bawa.
Thank you, Jazakumullah khair.
Well, yeah.
So on the behalf of ICSC Islamic Centers out of Calgary and all the attendees, we're really thankful to you, Sheikh Navaid, to make an arrangement for this session. And also we special thank to Mr. Hurram, who arranges all this technical, and our presidents